Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Made You Book. My name's Gretchen and today I am coming to you with my predictions for the 2024 Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist. Now, this has been a journey for me to put this list together. I started with about 40 books and I initially got it down to about 20, and then as I was doing research for my last video, which was about my upcoming releases that are in March, I ended up reading about a lot that had women's prize potential to me, and I ended up having to put those on the list. And finally I said enough is enough. It's time to get Hunger Games on this list, and yesterday I finally narrowed it down to my 16 predictions that I think have a really good chance of being considered or could possibly make the long list. Now, I will also say that it is anybody's guess. It is anybody's guess as to what books will actually make it. There is no formal list that tells us what books are eligible, which ones are even being considered. Now, we know the eligibility criteria, but it's also confusing to find out whether or not your book actually meets that criteria because it is based on a couple different factors. So obviously the book has to be written by a woman. That woman does not need to be a UK-based writer, but that book has to be published within the UK from the beginning of April, so April 1st, through the end of March of 2024. So there's also going to be books that we're not even exposed to yet or have yet to be released. So this is just meant to be a fun video talking about the books that I think have potential, and it's also fun to, like I said, watch everybody else's video and see what they think is going to make that list. So without further ado, let's get into my 16 predictions, and these are in no particular order. I lied. The only order that they're in is I'm going to go over the ones I physically have first, and then we'll go into the ones that I don't have a copy of at the end. So the first book that I think is going to make the list is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. Now, there's a couple different reasons I think that this book could make the list. First of all, I read it and I loved it. I thought it was a great book, and I did a full-length review of this, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. But another reason is that Ann Patchett previously won a women's prize for Bel Canto, and she has a reputation of being the type of author that the women's prize judges tend to go for. So I'm really expecting to see this on there. This is also on some other people's lists as well, and I would love if this would make it because it's one less that I'm gonna have to read. The second book that I'm predicting is The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. This is another book that I have already read, and I did another full-length review of this one as well, and I just think that this has women's prize written all over it. The writing was beautiful. Lauren Groff is a very established author, and the majority of the books that she puts out get a lot of book prize buzz, and I definitely can see this one. It was a book that had a lot of positive reviews. There really weren't too many negative things that I heard being said about this, and it's a story that follows the life of a woman during the colonization of Jamestown, and it pits her against not only nature but men, and it is her story of survival. This is not only a beautiful book, but it also is very feminist, and that's of course going to be hopefully catnip for the women's prize judges. My third prediction is Let Us Descend by Jasmine Ward. Now, this is a book that I have yet to read, but I have been wanting to read it for quite some time. I just haven't had a chance to prioritize it, and I would love to see it make the long list so that I can get to it sooner than later. Once again, Jasmine Ward is an established author that usually receives a lot of book prize buzz whenever she releases a new one. And this sounds like it is also going to be something that the judges would consider. This is going to be another epic, kind of sprawling book that takes our characters all over the country, from the Carolinas to Louisiana, and it's dealing with intense subjects like slavery and displacement and racism and all of those really heavy, thought-provoking topics that I think are really going to give the reader a lot to think about. And I have yet to read a Jasmine Ward book, but I hear that her prose is stunning, and I cannot wait to see if this makes the long list. And if it doesn't, this is definitely one I need to prioritize because I have been hearing just such wonderful things about it. So the next book that I'm predicting is going to be Little Monsters by Adrien Brodeur. Now, this book is one that I have not read, but it sounds super fascinating. It's supposedly a loose retelling of Cain and Abel. This story follows our two main characters, Ken and Abby, and they lost their mother at a very young age, and they're basically raised by their father, Adam, who is a renowned oceanographer, and he's very well respected in the scientific community. So as Adam approaches his 70th birthday, he is determined that he has one more great scientific breakthrough in him, and he secretly decides that he is going to stop taking his bipolar medication. So this book sounds like it's going to tackle some really difficult topics about loss and grief and coming to terms with your mortality, as well as dealing with the struggles of dealing with mental health disorders. So I think that this book sounds very relevant. It's going to have a lot to say, and because it is a loose retelling, there always seems to be kind of one book on the Women's Prize long list that is a retelling in some form. I think last year it was Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes, and I think that this definitely has a good chance. And I also, for those that I know that have read it did receive pretty positive reviews. I can't remember hearing anybody talk too much about how they just blatantly disliked this book. So I'm looking forward to getting to this one regardless, but hoping once again that it gets prioritized so I can get to it a little sooner. So we're moving on to my fifth pick, and that is going to be Lady Tan's Circle of Women by Lisa C. Now, the immediate reason why I think that this book has a really good chance is when I read the very first line of the blurb, it says, according to Confucius, an educated woman is a worthless woman. So right there, that tells me that this book has a lot to say, and it is going to be super feminist. And those that I know that have read it have said that they really enjoyed it, that the writing was great, and I think that this is going to be a great story about women supporting women, and I really hope to see this make the list. So the next couple books are the ones that everybody has on their list, so I won't go into too much detail with them, but there does seem to be a strong pattern for some of the books that I'm frequently seeing coming up on people's predictions lists, and for good reason. So I'll go through these next couple very quickly, but the first one of those is The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan. This is one I have yet to read, but I have heard nothing but excellent things about this book, and if this book is not on the long list, then about 90% of the people that are putting together predictions lists are going to be wrong, because this seems to be a book that everybody is talking about, and I am really excited. And this is, I think, a newer release. It's only been out for a month or so, I believe, so I haven't had a chance to read it, but once again, it's one of those books that I'm selfishly hoping makes the list so that I can prioritize it and get to it sooner than later. The other book that has been getting so much buzz from all of the booktubers that are making prediction videos is Julia by Sandra Newman. And this is a retelling of George Orwell's 1984, but it's from the perspective of Julia, who was Winston's lover in that book. So we're getting the infamous 1984 story, but we're getting it from a female perspective. And although she was a part of that book, she was very much a side character, and we didn't learn a whole lot about her. So I'm really excited to see what Sandra Newman does. And I have heard such amazing things about this book. And actually, I'm super disappointed with myself because I was supposed to have already read this for Scott over at Gunpowder Fiction and Plots book club, and I didn't get to it, and I really wish I had, but this is still a book that I will have very high on my TBR list, even if it doesn't make the long list, because I have just been hearing the best reviews about this book, and I really cannot think of a single review that I have read that has painted this in a negative light. So to take such a powerful book like 1984 and put a feminist spin on it, I am super excited to see what Sandra Newman did with that story, and I'm hoping that it does end up making the long list so I can get to this soon. The next book that I am predicting is The Wren by Anne Enright, and the most obvious reason why is because Anne Enright is Irish. And what book prize long list would be complete without at least one Irish author? They killed it last year. They're killing it this year so far as well. And I am sure that there will be, if not just one, multiple Irish authors on this year's long list. This one in particular struck me because it follows 3 generations of women, and it's talking about legacy and the inheritance of trauma from generation to generation. And Anne Enright, once again, is no stranger to book prizes, and she is known for her beautiful lyrical writing. So this just screams women's prize to me, and I certainly hope that it makes the list. And the next book that I'm predicting is Penance by Eliza Clark. And before I even read what this book was about, the fact that it is a new book by Eliza Clark immediately made me think of Women's Prize. She is a beloved author from her last book that she published, which was called Boy Parts, and she just seems to have this cult following of people that absolutely adored that book and her writing. And although I have yet to read it, it sounds like a book that I would really enjoy from the reviews and the descriptions that I have heard, and I have heard that her writing is just fantastic. So I'm looking forward to getting to both that book as well as this one. But the other reason that this book really stood out to me as a potential for the Women's Prize is that it focuses on a crime that happened 10 years ago in the past, and it was a violent crime that was committed by 3 girls. They apparently set fire to one of their classmates, and then we fast forward to the current day, and we have the investigators and people that were involved or present during the time that that crime happened are reflecting, and all sorts of things start to come up out of the woodwork, and it kind of almost has unreliable narrator vibes, which I absolutely love, where you're questioning whether or not what you're hearing is actually truth. It also talks about true crime and how we feed into it and how it's such a part of our culture and how media can influence it. And the book, it just sounds like it has a lot to say, and there's going to be a lot of social commentary commentary included in it. So sounds fascinating. It sounds brutal. I know that a lot of times when I think of the Women's Prize, I think of, you know, happy, kind of feel good, women's power type success story kind of books, but I like a dark book too, and this sounds like it's right up my alley, and this could be one that makes it onto the long list. My next pick is actually the final one that I have a physical copy for, and that is Evil Eye by Etaf Rum. So this story follows our main character Yara, and she grew up with parents that had a tumultuous marriage, and she is used to or expected the same for herself. Well, as an adult, she has seen success. She is highly educated. She has a loving husband and a fairly stable marriage. She has children that she loves, and everything on the surface to her seems like something that she should be completely content with, but for some reason she just has that unsettling feeling about everything. So in talking to her mother is convinced that the way that why she feels the way she feels is due to a curse, and as Yara starts to dig into her past and start to uncover some of the things that happened throughout her life, she starts to get answers to some of those questions. And anytime there's a story where you have a character that is digging into their past and they're finding out all of this stuff that was either repressed or maybe they didn't even know about or experience at all, that's just fascinating to me. And also, I have heard several readers that I highly respect their opinion on saying that this was one of their favorite books. And I've heard the writing is beautiful, and I'm really looking forward to getting to this one. This is another one that I should have read last year, but shame on me, I prioritized other things. But I'm really hoping that the Women's Prize long list gives me an excuse to pick this one up as soon as possible. My next prediction is going to be The Great Divide by Cristina Henriquez. And this is one of those books that I discovered when I was doing my research for my March anticipated reads video. This is a book that it's historical fiction, and it is set during the time when the construction of the Panama Canal was happening. So it's a book about displacement of people. It's a book that's going to discuss the tragedies and the dark side of all that happened in order to build the canal. And it sounds fascinating. And as soon as I was reading the blurb and I was starting to look into that book, my immediate thought was, this sounds like something that the Women's Prize judges will be all over, and I certainly hope that is the case. This book is not out for a couple more weeks, so I'm really selfishly hoping that it gets longlisted so that they up the publication date so that I can get it sooner. So yeah, hoping to see this book make the list. So the next book that I want to see on the long list is Pet by Catherine Chidgey. This is an author that was previously longlisted in the past for her book Remote Sympathy, and I would not be surprised to see Pet make it to the list as well. This book is about a girl and her attempt to become the teacher's pet, and I think that there is obviously more than just what is on the surface. I think that this book is kind of more leaning toward the psychological or the thriller side of things. And I always like to see a very good, put together, well-crafted psychological thriller that is literary in nature. I absolutely love those types of books, so I'm hoping that the book kind of lives up to that hype in my mind. And once again, I need an excuse to get to it sooner than later, so I'm really hoping that it makes the long list. And it's a Europa edition, and you know how I feel about those. It's one of my favorite publishing houses, and I always know that they are so good at putting out books that I just gel with, and I'm really looking forward to seeing if this one makes it. My next prediction is Soldier Sailor by Claire Kilroy. This is a book that so many people are predicting for the Women's Prize, but it also was a favorite for a lot of people's long list for last year's Booker Prize. So for people to still be talking about this book is just a testament to how good it is, supposedly. I wouldn't know. This is one I have yet to read, but I am hearing nothing but good things for the most part. There were a couple people that I heard that didn't get along with it, but it sounds like the type of book that would get some attention from the Women's Prize, mainly because it focuses on motherhood, the relationship between a mother and her infant son. And I know that not only does it explore motherhood, but it also kind of sometimes describes the darker side of motherhood as well. So potentially maybe about postpartum depression or, you know, the more challenging side of motherhood. So many people paint motherhood in this wonderful and beautiful light, which I'm sure that it is, but it's a tough job being a mom, and I think that from what I have heard, this book does a really good job of exploring both the good and the bad. So looking forward to seeing that, and obviously anything to do with motherhood is going to be a good fit for the Women's Prize. The next book I'm predicting is The Rachel Incident by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is another Irish author, and I loved this book. This was one that I read last year toward the end, and I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this book. This book was messy. The characters were unlikable. The things that they were doing to each other were just absolutely deplorable, but it's so real and it's so focused on those ugly aspects of people and their personalities and how we treat each other. And it talks about friendship, it talks about romantic relationships, and I think that it was brilliant, and I would love to see this book get nominated or longlisted, and I selfishly just want it longlisted so I have more people to talk about it with. And another book that I think has a really good shot of making the long list is The Story of the Forest by Linda Grant. This book was brought to my attention last year when I was researching books that potentially could get longlisted for the Booker Prize. It didn't make the Booker Prize long list, but I think that there's still a lot of talk and buzz about it that it might be considered for the Women's Prize. I think that it covers a lot of different ground. It sounds like a very unique type of book. The plot focuses on politics and immigration from Latvia to the UK. So we're talking about family, displacement, culture, politics. I think the reason that they went from Latvia to the UK had to do with World War I. And it just seems like a multifaceted story. It sounds like something that has a lot going on. It also sounds like it could be messy, and if done wrong, it could almost be kind of kitschy, if that makes sense. But from what I've heard, for the most part, it's done very well. And I think that anytime a book talks about kind of reading like a fairy tale or mythology, I'm always going to be fascinated in that because there's just something special to me about books like that. So regardless of it getting longlisted, I do want to read the book. It's not a book that is highly prioritized for me, so I kind of secretly want it to get longlisted to force me to read it sooner, because I do worry that if I don't get to it soon, that I'm not going to get to it for a very long time. I have heard a couple other folks predict that this would be on the long list as well, so fingers crossed, we'll see what happens. And last but not least, we have Mong Girl by Hanako Footman. And this book caught my attention because it follows the narratives of 3 different women in different places. So they're interwoven. We have a young girl who lost her mother at a very young age and she's living in Surrey. And then we have a young woman who is living in Tokyo, navigating through the nightclub and the nightlife scene. And then we also have a girl named Yuki who left Japan to move to London because she aspires to be a concert violinist. And apparently all 3 of their stories are interwoven and they have connections, and I love when stories do that. And this just sounds like a book that is going to be beautifully written and probably a very heartwarming and touching story, and it just sounds like a book that I would hope the judges consider for the long list. Well, there you have it. Those are my 16 predictions. My goal is I hope to have maybe got at least 3 of them. I know I'm not going to get anywhere near there, but I feel like for my track record in the past, if I can at least get 3, I will be very happy with that. And as soon as the long list is announced, I will put out a reaction video, and then from there we'll start to do all of the individual book reviews for all of the long listed titles. I do plan on reading the entirety of the long list, so we have a lot of reading ahead of us, and until we read again, bye!